Since Christmas is approaching, I thought it would be fun to talk about the famous Hallmark movies and how their redundant plots are actually a pretty dangerous tool of propaganda. I know this all sounds dramatic and you're already picturing me in my big snowflake suit, but 'tis the season, am I right, ladies? So if you often find yourself saying, "It's not that deep," this video probably isn't for you. As the holiday season approaches, the Hallmark Channel fills each of its slots with Christmas romance movies, a seemingly harmless pop culture tradition. While at first it appears that the female protagonist finds empowerment in learning about the Christmas spirit, in actuality, she forfeits her lifestyle and conforms in order to find love. And of course, I have to have my pretentious power statement. Through a feminist theoretical lens, Hallmark Christmas movies reveal that their oversaturated formula for holiday romance strips the protagonist of her agency and molds her into the patriarchal ideal. By analyzing reoccurring tropes in these movies, it becomes apparent how this Hallmark formula, the channel's single recurring plot format, negatively impacts the female viewer by attempting to have her replicate the ideal woman from these films. See, I told you it was pretentious. I never knew much about these movies growing up, my family being more inclined to watch cheesier animated stuff. However, there was a weekend during my sophomore year of college where all of my roommates went home. I had pinched a nerve in my neck, so I spent nearly 3 days straight lying on an uncomfortable dorm couch, ice pack on neck, candy cane in mouth, Hallmark movies cycling over and over on the TV. And they all started to bleed together, but I was mesmerized. I kept asking myself, how are they getting away with repackaging the same characters, same plots over and over? Why am I supposed to feel okay that the protagonist cheated on her fiancé with a cowboy just because her fiancé took a call in the middle of Christmas dinner? After sitting on it, I think these repurposed protagonists are meant to set some sort of romanticized ideal, one that works in 2 ways. 1, it makes the female viewers create this idealized notion of how they should act in order to achieve a storybook romance. 2, and parallel to this point, these movies pump out cookie-cutter women that the viewers, idealizing them, are meant to replicate. So what is the Hallmark formula? These movies don't have to hit every point, but they usually go something like this. A white woman with loosely curled hair works in a high-paying job in the city, but has to visit a small town that is oddly obsessed with Christmas. She meets some rugged white dude from the town who she instantly has beef with, but it's like the sexy kind of beef. She's bitter about all the Christmas and she's stressed with work, but eventually the little Christmas town worms their way into her heart and she leaves her fiancé, whose biggest sin was caring about his job. She gets with the rugged man, potentially fosters a close relationship with his kid, if the movie went for the single dad route, and then it snows and she leaves her job and moves back to town. For a frame of reference, I'll use the 2019 Hallmark film, Nostalgic Christmas. In the film, Ann Garrison, a New York City big company toy buyer, visits her hometown to help her father sell his quaint toy shop. She meets Keith McLean, a single father, and quickly bonds with him and his daughter. In the end, she leaves her life in New York City to move back home and work at the toy shop and fill the pseudo-mother role for Keith's daughter, Jessie. Even though every other character convinces her to move home throughout the movie, the decision is posed as Anne's decision in the end, giving the viewer the false impression that Anne possesses agency. The format of Nostalgic Christmas stresses Anne's change. She begins as a work-driven and independent woman, and ends up filling the stay-at-home mother role, and not of her own accord. And I don't mean to take away the agency of stay-at-home mothers, but rather, I wish to stress how Anne doesn't seem to want this position at all throughout the movie, up until its convenient conclusion. The first trope of the Hallmark formula I want to focus on is the protagonist. In the Hallmark formula, the protagonist subscribes to a list of tropes, all of which impose patriarchal standards onto the viewers. Just like Anne, most Hallmark protagonists are white, straight, able-bodied, cisgender, and Christian women. Since these are the women chosen to star in these movies and get romantic happily ever afters, the underlying implication is that being a white, straight, able-bodied, cisgender, Christian woman is rewarded by society. The idea isn't necessarily wrong. These identities come with privilege. However, Hallmark movies aren't commenting on the systemic issue, but rather are endorsing it. In Hangin's article, Hallmark, No More Whitewash Christmas, but it could make the Yuletide gayer, great article title by the way, she states, the 2018 Christmas lineup, which features a total of 38 movies, finally made the leap to feature 4 women of color in starring roles. Almost 90% of protagonists being white women is extremely disproportionate for accurate representation. Women of color, and if we go back to my earlier description, literally any woman who isn't white, straight, able-bodied, cisgender Christian, is told that they don't have a place in the patriarchy's model world. So obviously, the protagonist in the Hallmark formula is meant to set a hierarchy amongst women that serves the patriarchy. But how does this propaganda play out? Let's turn to Audre Lorde's Age, Race, Class, and Sex, Women Redefining Difference. In this, she states, "It is easier once again for white women to believe the dangerous fantasy that if you are good enough, pretty enough, sweet enough, quiet enough, teach the children to behave, hate the right people, and marry the right men, then you will be able to coexist with patriarchy in relative peace." By choosing to only write particular protagonists, Hallmark movies practice exactly what Lorde claims the patriarchy practices, erasing women who belong to marginalized groups while simultaneously assuring white women with privileged identities that they have a place in the patriarchy. The viewers who wouldn't be casted as the Hallmark protagonist, specifically women of color, are essentially told that they don't have a place as anyone but the side character. Meanwhile, white women of privileged identities are told with effort they can conform to be the ideal woman. As Hallmark's target demographic is already white, straight, able-bodied, cisgender Christian women, Lorde's theory is dangerously parallel with how Hallmark's viewers act complicit. While Lorde makes it clear that this coexistence between white women and the patriarchy is, to a degree, a falsity, it is undeniable that white women have a safer place in the patriarchy than women of color. In fact, we hold a very unique position in which, while oppressed, we act as an oppressor. We use the feeble manner in which we are viewed by society at large to point the finger and claim what power is offered to us. This sense of safety allows white female viewers to idealize the world they're watching in these movies and project the plot onto their own desires. While being white allows these women privilege, there's blatant sexism in the channel's canonical world that all female viewers should criticize, especially for the lack of intersectionality. So let's go into the next protagonist trope of the Hallmark formula. The plot always focuses on the protagonist's romance, heterosexual romance specifically. In Nostalgia Christmas, Anne comes back home in order to take a short break from her job and help her father sell his business. But she ends up falling in love with the first man she meets there. And as I've stated in other videos, romance itself isn't inherently a bad thing at all. In fact, it can be a very fun addition to a film. However, once romance becomes the defining factor in a character's self-worth, well, the film's integrity goes down the pooper. Considering these Hallmark romances all boast the same plots, it's easy to say that the idea they're trying to get into the viewer's head is, hey, get married to a man. The reason Hallmark movies never have lesbian leads, for example, is because the patriarchy has no use for lesbians, as lesbians, in the eyes of society, do not rely on men nor provide anything for them, and by this I mean no sexual, romantic, or overt gain for the system at large. This is why the channel doesn't want to acknowledge that sexualities outside of heterosexuality exist. The second they acknowledge that these identities exist, let alone are treasured and worthy of being centered, well, then everything is no longer their ideal, no longer upholding the status quo. Instead, the protagonists are women who have the privilege to ignore systemic oppression like racism and homophobia because these movies deny such issues exist while simultaneously perpetuating them in the real world. Side note, one Hallmark movie I watched had two women who I was so sure were going to get together at the end, but it turned out that they were like long-lost sisters, and that bond they had was a sisterly bond. I wanted to cry. I also think the romance that the protagonist inevitably invests in will always rely on a mismatched power dynamic. She must reach an ideal femininity to play off of gruff cowboy's ideal masculinity. Rosemary Garland Thompson's Integrating Disability Transforming Feminist Theory states that banishment from femininity can be both a liability and a benefit. If this is true, which I think it is, there comes a certain freedom in not being the protagonist of these films. And if you've seen these Hallmark movies, then you should already know how often they give way to a best friend character acting as the voice of reason while simultaneously acting as the protagonist's confidant. The best friend can often be a black woman as the token of inclusion, and while this character is meant to be someone who ties the protagonist to her city job, the best friend, removed from the location and focus of the film, usually has the most logical thoughts. You know, silly thoughts like, hey, if you quit your job to bake Christmas cookies for a living, how will you exist under the crushing weight of capitalism, babe? Or, you just met this guy, maybe you shouldn't get married already. Or my personal favorite, what did Rob the accountant ever do to you to make you cheat on him with Mr. Rodeo? Since these characters possess their own thoughts and agency, they are posed as not necessarily an antagonist, but as an obstacle for the protagonist. They are removed from the submissive nature of all other Hallmark women. Oddly enough, their removal from this ideal femininity is the very thing that allows them to possess a voice. Our next trope in the Hallmark formula is the protagonist having a high-paying job in the city and leading a work-driven life. In Nostalgia Christmas, Anne works in New York City as a big toy buyer for a big company, and clearly her work takes up a large part of her identity. She's financially independent, career-driven, and good at what she does. If anything, the beginning of the movie, meant to paint Anne as some overworked woman, seems more like most women's happily ever after. Once again, not so much because of her position, but because she seems genuinely content with it. Of course, the ideal woman is not independent, and as Simone de Beauvoir states in The Second Sex, humanity is male, and man defines woman not in herself, but as relative to him. She's not regarded as an autonomous being. This sentiment directly relates to Hallmark's protagonist and her relationship with whatever white male iteration is being used. Let's not be confused. Hallmark movies, while targeted at women, are still made for the benefits of the patriarchy. And let me please clarify that the patriarchy can hurt men too, and we would all be better off without these movies. The male characters never leave their jobs, have to admit their faults, or forfeit anything. Keith's own job is saved when his boss decides not to sell the mill on account of holiday spirit or whatever, and his new girlfriend leaves her New York City job to stay with him. Because these movies always lean in favor of the male characters, it's no surprise that the production is primarily male-led. A Hallmark executive stated about 18 to 19% of our movies are directed by women. The industry needs to catch up because it has largely been a male-dominated career. We are making great strides, I think, with women, but continuing our diversity slate is going to be critical in 2019. Female viewers, forced to identify with protagonists like Anne, are not only told that their romance must be straight, whitewashed, and codependent, but that their own story is a side to a larger male-centered narrative. In Nostalgia Christmas, when Anne's father asks, "What about your city job?" Anne responds that while she loves her job, she's gotten it out of her system. This exchange solidifies to the viewers the sexist ideology that independence is a phase for women, and eventually, a woman will settle down with family over career. This works with Simone de Beauvoir's theory that woman has always been males dependent, as Anne's final position is as the fill-in woman of Keith's family. She gives up her independence and lifestyle in order to become his lover and Jesse's mother. Seeing this, viewers are told that love and family are the ultimate goals. Additionally, they are told that love requires a woman's sacrifice, but never compromise. Anne tells her father and Keith that she's staying as if it's her own decision, despite the both of them attempting to convince her to stay throughout the entire movie. This tells female viewers that abiding by patriarchal rules is synonymous with women having agency, so long as it is the patriarchy they choose to abide by. When we look to the Hallmark formula, another trope the protagonist suffers is that, in some way, she's expected to endure the emotional burden of whatever is failing the small town. In this case, Anne's father decides she must be the one to conjure up a plan to sell his toy business. And when Keith's daughter needs pageant lessons, he tells Anne she must be the one to teach her. In feminist theory, such expectations of women are often referred to as emotional labor. I think if I stretch, I can tie these ideas into James Cady and Maria Peno's Teaching Emotional Labor Through Television and Film. Emotional labor is defined here as the process by which workers manage and direct their own emotions to fit with organizational rules about societally approved emotional experiences and expressions. Emotional labor can involve surface acting or attempting to align one's expression of emotion with normative expectations. That was so hard for me to say. While this article focuses on gender in the workplace, the concept is applicable to gender relations as a whole. If applied to de Beauvoir's theory that nearly everything women do is othered from the norm, then emotional labor must be no different. While this article argues most work focuses on emotional labor and one's social status, current scholars are beginning to examine the intersections between these concepts. Hallmark only uses the patriarchally ideal woman. This means these protagonists do not exist within intersections of identity, and therefore the full depth of emotional labor isn't even applicable within the Hallmark formula. Anne, however, still endures the expectations that she will perform her womanly duties to fix men's issues. The Peno article's focus on work in this case is interesting. They discuss how women are often expected to take on additional work for no compensation, or are overrepresented in service work that requires emotional labor. However, Anne's career is back in New York City, as all Hallmark protagonists' careers are far away from the movie's focus. Anne is not expected to provide emotional labor for monetary compensation or career status. She's expected to provide it solely based on her gender and proximity. The female viewers watch these protagonists bend backwards to help save the day, not out of kindness, but out of obligation. And as we've said, women are watching these movies and being hinted at to replicate them. In turn, they are groomed via film to hide their personal troubles and instead prioritize the comfort of others. Anne states clear disinterest in helping the toy shop at first, and downright tells Keith she is too busy to help train Jessie for the pageant. But it doesn't take long for her to give in and obey with a smile. Women watching these movies are told not only that emotional burden will befall them, but that they must actively accept it, and with a smile. A less common but still stressed trope in the Hallmark formula is that the protagonist meets a child in order to unlock a maternal instinct and create an unbreakable motherly bond. In Nostalgic Christmas, Anne meets Keith's daughter Jessie at the toy shop. Her immediate affinity with the girl is rushed, but stresses the idea that the patriarchy values a woman's ability to act maternal, even if she herself is not a mother. In the movie, Jessie wants to sing in the annual Christmas pageant, the same pageant Anne was in when she was younger. Even though Anne stresses she is too busy to help, Keith insists she has to, but never states why. He assumes that Anne will look after and teach Jessie, and in line with the Hallmark formula, Anne begins to fill in Jessie's missing mother role. De Beauvoir considers the mother-daughter relationship to be an apprenticeship for life in the world, in which she grasps what it means to be a woman therein. This stresses how everything we've talked about is a vicious cycle. Anne is the patriarchy's ideal woman because, even though she demonstrated no interest in children while at her job, she soon learns that passing on her feminine knowledge is far more rewarding than a six-figure salary. She is proof that these harmful systems are self-sufficient. What this tells viewers is that their worth is reduced to being a dependent, a wife, and a mother. Female viewers watch Hallmark movies and see women with maternal instincts who, as stated, are always rewarded in the movie's conclusion. The female viewers then understand that being maternal is not only natural, but rewarded. Not only this, but Anne forfeiting her job in order to keep domesticity, I'm really bad at saying this word, creates for women a dreaded ultimatum. Do you want a job or a family? Of course, no one actually has to choose in the real world. It's not one or the other. But in these movies, the answer is always family, and you have to be happy to choose that. Seeing as Hallmark is a corporation that looks to make as much money as possible during the holiday season, it makes sense that Hallmark would cash out on these harmful systems. However, once the viewers, no matter what gender or identity they align with, gain this awareness, they can reclaim their agency as a viewer and refuse to be conditioned. If I'm being honest, this whole video is just some repurposed version of an essay I wrote in college, but that essay had a much more pessimistic ending note than what I'm about to say. I think the Hallmark formula is already being broken down. Oddly enough, Hallmark has become a literal joke on social media, making me realize that this self-awareness has already taken place. We can flip the script, together, and make sure that the Hallmark formula doesn't condition us into believing the harmful falsities normalized in these films are actual reality, but rather just an indication of its faults.